Hi folks, welcome to session number 7 of my Blender training. Right, in the last session we've learned about modeling, okay, some advanced modeling tools, and we created this flower vase and leaves, right? So the next thing is to unwrap, okay, UV unwrap this object. So basically you take this object and then you create a two-dimensional representation of this 3D model, okay, and then paint a texture, okay, and then light and shade your scene, okay. so uh, so yeah, basically UV mapping is making a two-dimensional image representation of a 3D model. So this sphere, okay, is UV unwrapped into a two-dimensional image, so that we can assign a texture and render the simple sphere. Okay, so the actual method of applying a texture onto the UV map is called texture mapping. Okay, we can create texture maps for different material properties of an object like diffuse, specular, etc. Anyway, so let's deal with the basics for now. Okay, in today's class, okay, which is by the way split into two subclasses. Okay, so in the first class we'll learn about the very basics of Blender's UV unwrapping. Okay, so let me open up a new file, and now for UV unwrapping we need to have a custom layout, right? So Blender provides a custom layout called UV editing, right? But I'm not happy with this. Okay, so I want to reorganize this layout. So first off, I want to swap these two areas so that I get the 3D view on the left side. Okay, so to do that I hold down the control key and left click on this icon here, this triangle icon, and then drag the mouse. So you will notice the cursor change. Okay, and I place the mouse cursor on the right side and my editors are swapped. Okay, now I want to make this, okay, into a properties editor. Okay, and I want to flip this properties editor header to the top, so I right click on it and flip to top. The hotkey for swapping this header top and bottom is F5. Okay, so just place the mouse cursor on the header and press F5. It's applicable in any editor type. Okay, so that's good. Now I want the 3D editor on the top side and then a UV editor on the bottom side. So left click on this icon again and click and drag. Okay, and to collapse, just left click and move the mouse up or down. Okay, there's another way of splitting the area, that is using an operator. So press the space key to get the search menu and type split. So there's a split area operator which splits the current editor into two. Now this one should be a UV image editor. Okay, all right, and I would want this particular editor, I mean layout, to be available to me every time I open Blender. So I'll just escape, file, save user settings. Okay, or I can go back to my default, okay, and save user settings. Okay, so the next time I open a new instance of Blender or a new session of Blender, my UV editing layout will be the one that I had configured before. Okay, great. So with that out of the way, now let's start learning about the basics of UV unwrapping. Okay, so in this first part we'll be using this simple cube, okay, and unwrap it using a few techniques, and then paint some textures and assign it to material, because Right now, if you render this scene, right, okay, you just see a simple cube. Yeah, so we'll paint some textures and check it out. Okay, so escape. Okay, so the UV image editor also doubles as the frame buffer, basically the render buffer. So the UV image editor is now displaying the render result. Okay, so yeah, I can just click this to just close it for now. It's still there. Okay, the render result is still there, so I'm just closing it. Great. So how do we go about creating a UV unwrap, right? So let me also create an outliner. So left click and drag and outliner F5 to move it to the top, and I want to just see the current scene, okay, which is this. So let me hide my lamp and also my camera. Okay, great. And view selected, great. Now let's switch to the object data properties in the properties editor, right? In the properties editor, you'll see there is a panel called UV texture. So this is where we'll create UV textures. You can have multiple UV layouts. Okay, uh, so we'll learn about that. So let's click this plus sign. Okay, click the plus sign, and I'll name this. Okay, my object name is cube, right? So I'll just name it cube default UV. Okay, so basically for this particular UV layer, right, we'll be using Blender's default UV unwrapping. Okay, that's why I named it cube underscore default UV. Right, now the next thing is to see how Blender did the default UV, right, the UV layout. So let's switch to the edit mode. Okay, you'll notice the UV editor has changed now. Okay, in the edit mode, in the object mode it's very simple, but in the edit mode you'll see these okay, again UV vertices. Okay, so Blender basically created something called a default UV mapping, which is a planar mapping. Okay, you'll understand what planar mapping is soon as we assign a texture to this, right? So with the default UV layout assigned, okay, let's make sure you have selected all the vertices in the 3D view, right? Then click on new. Okay, click on new, and for the name, right, I'll be using the name of the UV layer cube underscore default UV. Okay, I'll say map because this is a texture map. Okay, and I'll be using okay, let's just go with the defaults. Yeah, okay, so there you go. You, you'll notice that it assigned a black image texture to the object, but you don't see it displayed in the 3D view. So let's go to the 3D view properties, and I just found out recently to collapse the panel, right, just put the mouse on the panel header and press A. Okay, I still don't know how to collapse all the panels at once. Okay, once I find out I will cover it. So let's go to display and click on textured solid. So okay, so now you'll notice our UV layout assigned texture is displaying in the 3D view. Okay, all right, so let's go back to the edit mode. Okay, so basically Blender did the default planar UV mapping. So planar UV mapping is, let me go to the face select mode. So for each face, right, so as I select this face, okay, it just assigned it to the whole texture space. Okay, remember in 3 dimensions we have X, Y and Z, right? In 2 dimensional UV space we use the terms U for the X-axis and V for the y-axis. Okay, so basically a face in the 3D space is mapped into a face in the 2D space. Okay, from three-dimensional coordinates to two-dimensional coordinates. Okay, so that's why we say UV mapping. So with planar UV mapping, okay, all these faces, okay, are sharing the same UV space. Okay, so now what does that mean? It means that now let's see it in example. Yeah, so let me deselect everything. Okay, select and deselect. Now let's paint this texture map. Okay, now let's make use of Blender's texture painting tools. Okay, Blender provides 2D texture painting and 3D texture painting. So to begin with, let's take a look at the 2D texture painting. So enable the image painting mode. Now once you enable that, you'll notice the mouse cursor has changed into a brush, and the properties of the brush are available from the UV editor properties window. Okay, um, okay, so basically we automatically generated a blank UV image. Okay, so you can also try out UV grid, okay, or a color grid, right? So maybe I'll use this. Maybe I'll paint on top of this UV grid. Okay, so also remember all the UV maps, the dimensions are a square dimensions, so the X and Y, okay, are of the same value. Okay, now there you go. We have the painting tools panels. Okay, the paint panel and the texture panel. Okay, tool panel, paint stroke and paint curve. Again, for this intro session, we'll just use the basic tools, the defaults. Okay, so let me choose some color. Okay, I'll use red color. Now, because of the default planar mapping, all the faces I said are using the same UV space, right? To see that in action, let me paint something. Okay, so okay, okay, you can undo, Control Z. Let me change the size of the brush. Okay, and okay, forgive my painting skills. Also, I'm using a mouse, so it's difficult for me. Okay, so you'll notice that all the faces are you know, are getting the same texture. Okay, although the orientation is different. Okay, we fix that right now. Okay, so that's the thing about planar mapping. Okay, all the faces of the model, right, which have been planar mapped, will get the same, or the default UV mapped will get the same texture. Okay, now let's fix the orientation of the UV. Okay, so you'll notice that for this face my texture is flipped. Now I can rotate these from by two ways. uh, so before that, let me save my texture file. Okay, now we painted something, right? You can either save this texture to a disk, okay, or you can just save the texture inside the Blender file. So I'm going to save this inside the Blender file. Okay, so it's called packing the data into the Blender file itself. So pack as PNG. Now this file is part of this Blender file, which reminds me to save my file. So let me call it record part 1. Okay, the good thing about packing your data inside the file is you can just share this file with your friends, and they can render your scene out without any problems. Okay, we'll learn more about packing data in later sessions. Cool, so we are done with saving this image map. Now we need to orient the UVs of these faces so that the texture is aligned or oriented properly. So let's start with this face. Okay, and if you notice this button here in the UV editor, so if you click this, the UV editing is synchronized between the 3D and the UV editor. So let me click this. Now as I select okay, a face, it gets updated here. Since all of these faces are lying on top of each other, it may not make sense right now, okay, but it's always good to have this toggle down. So let me select this. Now how do you rotate UVs, right? So we can do it in the 2D editor. Okay, so you basically select the face, okay, in the 3D editor, go back to the 2D editor or the UV editor and press the R key, okay, to rotate the UV space. Okay, so I can type the value as well, okay, to rotate by 90 degrees. So here in the 3D header you will see that okay, by using a value of -90 I'll get a proper orientation. So I'll just type -90. There you go. So that's one way of rotating the UVs. Yeah. So and the second way of rotating UVs is in the 3D editor. So select the face and type Control F. Okay, and you can also get this from the mesh menu, mesh, faces, and rotate UVs, okay, clockwise or anti-clockwise. There you go. Okay, and similarly here I need to rotate this anti-clockwise, so Control F and rotate UVs counterclockwise, and Control F, rotate UVs clockwise. All right, so let's go to the top view. um, Oops, view and top. Okay, and select the top face and Control F, rotate UVs clockwise. I can also get a menu of the previous actions by pressing the F3 key. Okay, you'll also find that in the 3D editor tool shelf. Okay, so you can either do repeat last. Okay, repeat last will repeat the last action, and you'll notice the hotkey is Shift R. Okay, or you can get history and click it. Okay, F3. Okay, Shift R. Awesome. All right, and also for the bottom face, so Shift R. Perfect. Okay, I think that should be good for now. So we have learned how to paint in the 2D space, right? Now let's see how to paint in the 3D space. So I switch back to the object mode by pressing the tab key. Now let's learn about 3D painting. Okay, let me save my file, file and save. And now the 3D editor, right, has a texture paint option. Okay, so far we have used the object mode, edit mode, and sculpt mode. And now let's use the texture paint option. When you enable texture paint mode, again the mouse changes into the brush. Okay, and the tool shelf also updates. Okay, let me just increase the area. All right, so you'll see that in the texture paint mode we have these panels. Okay, in the object mode the panels are different, and edit mode also the panels are different. So basically Blender's interface updates depending upon the context. Okay, so now the context is texture paint. Okay, so we have these panels. Again, for now we'll use the defaults. Okay, so we have different types of brushes. Okay, soften, smear. Okay, we'll learn about the clone brush in a later chapter. So let's use the default brush. And same thing, you have radius, strength, jittering, and different blend modes and pressure sensitive options. Okay, now Blender has something called projection painting. Okay, so like body paint 3D software, you can paint directly on the models. Okay, again we'll use the defaults to paint a few strokes on the 3D model. Okay, let me choose some other color. Okay, I'll use some color and increase the radius of the brush. That's too much. And paint. Okay, again, because of the planar mapping, okay, all the faces are getting the same effect. Okay, okay, the projection painting options are here. So here it says 80. What this means is, if my face normal, okay, angle is greater than 80 from the point of view, we cannot paint in that area. So you'll notice that these particular faces have a normal, okay, whose direction is more than 80 degrees, so I cannot paint there, but I can paint here. Okay, if I make it into 90, then I can paint on this whole face. Okay, cool. So that's a quick introduction to 3D painting. Okay, you can enable 2D painting in the UV editor and 3D painting in the texture in the 3D view editor, and you can paint from here as well. Okay, so there you go. And pack the data. Okay, so that's about a quick introduction to the projection painting, right? So let me save this file, and now let's learn how to use the other UV mapping techniques in Blender. Yeah, so let me switch back to the object mode and turn off the 2D painting mode. Okay, before that, let's quickly render our scene. Okay, view and camera. Okay, and just turn off the display of lamp and camera in the 3D view. Okay, so let me render. Well, you'll notice that the cube is still showing up as a gray cube. Yeah, that's because we have not texture mapped our object. Okay, so we'll see texture mapping after we learn about the other UV mapping techniques. Okay, now let me do a file, save as. Okay, and by hitting the plus minus key on the numeric keypad, okay, you can save your files in incremental fashion. Okay, so I'm saving this as part 2. All right, now let's use another technique for UV mapping. So for that, I will add one more UV layer slot. So click on this plus. Yeah, now let me name this cube underscore smart projection. So basically I'm going to use something called smart projection technique in Blender for this UV mapping. Okay, so I've added this layer, then switch to the edit mode. Okay, select all faces by pressing the A key. Okay, so first you deselect and then you select, and view selected. I have mapped the Q key to view selected, so, and hide the lamp and the camera in the 3D view. That's good. Now you'll notice that the previous map is still assigned to this. Okay, so I'll just click on this cross. Okay, again, Blender is giving me a default projection, UV projection. So let's use the next projection type. So press the U key in the 3D view. Okay, it brings up the UV mapping menu. So let me click Smart Project. Okay, as you see, a Smart Project uses these parameters here. Okay, to automatically lay out the faces of the object in a two-dimensional space. Okay, so for some models, it's the easiest way to UV unwrap. Okay, you can play with the oops, this image has come again. I think this is a small bug. Shouldn't be like this, so let me just unlink this again. Okay, so so we used smart projection, right? And now let's assign another map. Okay, I'll call this cube underscore smart projection map. Okay, so I've reached the limit of the name, so smart projection map. Okay, and this time I'll use a blank texture. Okay, but change the color, the base color, to something yellowish maybe. Okay, and press OK. Okay, you'll notice. Okay, now we have yellow based UV map. Okay, again, uh, same thing. Now all the faces have their own UV space. Okay, so since we've enabled the synchronization button, so I can select the face from the UV editor or from the 3D editor. Okay, so now each face gets its own UV space. Yeah, um, I can select all the faces by pressing the A key. Okay, and I can move these faces in the UV editor with the same hotkey that you use in the 3D editor, which is G. Okay, so the same hotkeys work here as well. Okay, transform G, rotate R, and resize S. So I can do things like this. Okay, scale and G. Okay, and then I can constrain it in the vertical direction by clicking the middle mouse as I'm moving the mouse upwards. Now it's constrained in the vertical or the V direction, and I can constrain in the horizontal direction by pressing G, and this time pressing X. Okay, X or the U direction. Okay, and escape to cancel, and Control Z to undo. Okay, cool. So yeah, now let's paint. Okay, let's paint. Enable the paint mode. Okay, and let's paint different digits. Okay, so I'll start with 1. Okay, 1 and 2. Okay, it's updating in the 3D view, and 3. Okay, for the rest let's paint in the 3D view. Also pack the image. Okay, and save the file. It's always good to save your work. And let me go out of the painting mode in the UV editor and switch to the texture paint. Okay, so 1 2 3, and let me choose this complement, and 4. Okay, and finally 5 and 6. Okay, so there you go. And same as before, to rotate the UVs, go into the edit mode, select the face, and mesh faces, rotate UVs clockwise. Okay, so this is good. Oh, Control F, rotate UVs clockwise, and switch to the top view, switch to the ortho view, select the top face, Control F, or I'll do Shift R to repeat the last operator. There you go, and Shift R. Perfect. Let's switch back to the perspective. All right, so there you go. Smart UV projection. Okay, and we have a better looking texture. Okay, so again, if you try to render. Okay, by the way, these icons over here. Okay, so this is the visibility of the object in the 3D viewport. and this is the selectability of an object. Okay, if you can select an object or not, uh, and this is if an object will appear in the final render. So okay, now let's render. Still the same, it's the same old boring cube. That's because we just did UV mapping, which is converting a three-dimensional model into a two-dimensional image representation, and then we just viewed the texture on the object. But for the actual object to be rendered with this particular image, we need to assign the texture to a material. Okay, that's called texture mapping. Not only that, every surface, right, every surface has different properties, the way it reflects light. So every surface has a diffuse property, okay, specular property, and isotropic property, so on and so forth. So using texture mapping, okay, we can attach different textures to different material properties, and create nice looking images. Okay, so to do that, um, escape. Okay, so just a quick summary. We have this cube. We have it has two UV layers. Okay, this first UV layer has been created using default UV mapping, and the second layer has been created using the smart projection UV mapping. Right, now let's see how to see the images that were used, okay, for the texture mapping to appear in the final render. So to do that, go to the material properties. Okay, since we started with the default Blender cube, you see this material over here. Okay, in case you do not see this, okay, say you click this X, okay, you lost the material, you can access it from the data blocks browser. Okay, so there's only one material in this Blender file, so that's showing up. Okay, and we have these material slots. Okay, and this particular material is attached to the object data, okay, which is the actual vertices. A material can also be attached to the object itself. Okay, but we will learn about this in the next class. Okay, so yeah, so you'll we have a diffuse property. Okay, I'll just leave it to the default. We have a specular property, and I'll just toggle this cubic interpolation. Okay, this cubic interpolation gives smoother transitions, okay, on the object. If you have multiple lights, okay, you see this boundary or the terminator, so the transition is very harsh. So by using this cubic interpolation, the transition is much smoother. Okay, so that's that. And yeah, that's about the material. Now we need to assign a texture to this material. Okay, similarly we have various texture slots. Okay, and now we need to choose a texture type. Okay, so my texture is a image, so my texture type is a image or a movie. Okay, now depending upon the type of the texture that you choose, the panels will change. Okay, so let's go back to okay, so anyway, let's start with this. The the preview panel is always there, okay, for all the texture types. Let me switch the view of the preview to both, so that I see the texture and the material. Okay, that's good. And for this image or movie type, right, these three panels come into action. Okay, image sampling and image mapping. Okay, for every texture, the colors, mapping, influence, and custom properties exist. Okay, it's like if I switch to, say, the clouds, you'll notice that for the clouds texture type, there's only one panel. Okay, and if you choose something else like Voronoi, Okay, for Voronoi also is just the Voronoi panel. Okay, so let's go back to image or a movie. Now first thing is we need to point to the texture. Since we packed our texture into the file, right, so they appear here. So I want to see my first texture, which is cube default UV map. I'll choose that. That's the first step. Image sampling and image mapping, we'll use the defaults for now. Okay, we'll come back to them in advanced lessons. Now comes the texture mapping. Okay, so basically we need to tell Blender, okay, when it's rendering, okay, which UV coordinates to use, okay, and which layer of the UV coordinates to use. So we need to choose coordinates to UV because we did the manual unwrap, and then which layer to use. So let's choose the first one, cube default UV, right? And finally, now this particular texture that we have loaded, okay, let's name this. Okay, let's name this texture. So to name the texture in the easy way, right? So just a click drag into the slot here. Okay, again, let's say it was text, right? So click on the, just click, uh, just point the mouse on this data block, click and drag. That's it, paste. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Okay, so now this particular image, right, is mapped to the color channel. Okay, so it affects the color. Okay, again we'll learn about all these in later classes, so let's use this for now. Okay, now we are good to render. Okay, so let's click render. There you go. So now Blender is using the UV coordinates that we have assigned using the UV editor, and also the texture that we have painted. Okay, let me move the light. Okay, go to the top view by pressing the 7 key. Okay, let me move the light over here. Okay, and switch back to the camera, move the light again and render. There you go. Okay, um, cool. So if I want to see the other smart projection map, right, I need to go back to the mapping. Okay, change this to smart projection, and also point the map to smart projection. Okay, and render. Okay, so as simple as that. So that's a quick introduction to UV mapping, okay, and texture mapping in Blender. Okay, um, in the second part of this lesson 7, we will use the flower vase and the leaves that we modeled in lesson 6, and take a look at some advanced UV unwrapping techniques in Blender. So just to give you a preview, so if you have a complex character like this, okay, by creating what we call as UV scenes, okay, Blender can take these UV scenes as a start and give you a two-dimensional representation of the model. Okay, then you can paint the actual texture on top of it. So that will be in the second part of this lesson 7. Okay, again, all my videos are available on my website, okay, which is sites.google.com/site/Satish Goda under Blender training. Okay, and if you have any comments, please definitely share with me. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/user/Satish Goda. Okay, thank you so much.